Imagine serving the Soviet secret police for 20 years. Imagine helping to build the machinery of political repression. Imagine marrying into Stalin's own family. None of it would save you. Stanisław Redens was a senior officer of the Cheka, the OGPU, and later the NKVD. He served the Soviet security apparatus from the revolutionary years through Stalin's Great Terror. He held important positions, received the Order of Lenin, and worked at the center of Soviet power. He was also of Polish origin. Through his marriage to Anna Alliluyeva, the sister of Nadezhda Alliluyeva, Stalin's second wife, Redens became connected to Stalin's wider family circle. For years, he appeared secure. He had rank, political influence, official honors, and a family connection to the dictator. Yet in Stalin's Soviet Union, there was no such thing as permanent security. In November 1938, Stanisław Redens was arrested. In July 1940, he was executed. This is the story of a Polish-born Soviet security chief, a man who served Stalinist terror, helped maintain its institutions, and was ultimately destroyed by the same system. Stanisław Francevich Redens was born on the 17th of May 1892 in the Ekaterinoslav region of the Russian Empire, in an area that is now part of Ukraine. He came from a Polish family, at a time when Poland itself did not exist as an independent state and was divided between Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. His early life was difficult. Redens lost his father while still young and spent part of his childhood in the home of an uncle. Like many people from the industrial regions of the Russian Empire, he entered the world of manual work early and was drawn toward radical political ideas. In 1914, he joined the Russian Social Democratic movement. Europe was already at war. The Russian Empire was under enormous pressure, and revolutionary groups were becoming increasingly active. The collapse of the Tsarist state in 1917 changed everything. The Bolsheviks took power in Petrograd in November 1917. Almost immediately they faced civil war, armed opposition, foreign intervention, food shortages, economic collapse, and resistance from millions of people who did not accept their rule. To survive, the new regime needed more than party speeches and revolutionary slogans. It needed force. In 1918, Redens joined the Cheka, the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage. It was the first Soviet political police force, created under Felix Dzerzhinsky. The Cheka was supposed to defend the revolution. In practice, it became a major instrument of the Red Terror. During the Civil War, its officers arrested political opponents, investigated alleged conspiracies, suppressed uprisings, and carried out executions. The boundary between genuine security work and political repression was often almost non-existent. For a young Bolshevik activist, the Cheka offered a path to power. The Soviet state needed loyal officials who could work under pressure, follow orders, and treat political enemies as threats to be removed. Redens entered this world at its beginning. He would spend the rest of his life inside it. After the Civil War, the Soviet political police changed its name more than once. The Cheka became the GPU, then the OGPU, and in 1934 it was absorbed into the NKVD, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. The names changed. The function did not. The political police remained responsible for surveillance, arrests, prisons, border security, internal security, and the destruction of people defined by the regime as enemies. Redens rose through this structure during the 1920s. He worked in Soviet Ukraine, where the regime was trying to consolidate control after years of war, famine, rebellion, and political conflict. This was also the period in which Stalin was strengthening his position inside the Communist Party. After Lenin's death in 1924, the Soviet leadership entered a struggle for power. Stalin gradually defeated his rivals. Leon Trotsky was removed from the leadership, expelled from the Soviet Union, and later murdered in exile. Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev were first marginalized, then arrested, and eventually executed. Nikolai Bukharin, once one of Stalin's allies, would meet the same fate. For a security official, political loyalty was essential. Redens did not build his career as a public speaker or a famous theoretician. He advanced through the apparatus that gave Stalin control over the state. He also acquired a valuable personal connection. Redens married Anna Alliluyeva. She was the sister of Nadezhda Alliluyeva, Stalin's second wife. This did not mean that Redens was a daily companion of Stalin or a decisive figure in Kremlin politics. It would be inaccurate to exaggerate his personal closeness to the dictator. However, the marriage connected him to Stalin's wider family environment and placed him nearer to the center of power than most Soviet officials could ever hope to be. By the early 1930s, Redens had reached one of the most important positions in the Soviet security apparatus. In July 1931, he became head of the political police in the Moscow region. This was a powerful appointment. Moscow was not just another administrative region. It was the center of the Communist Party, the Soviet government, the military command, the ministries, the diplomatic corps, and the most important cultural and scientific institutions in the country. To oversee political security in Moscow meant operating at the heart of Stalin's state. For nearly 7 years, from July 1931 until January 1938, Redens headed the political police in the Moscow region. Those years covered one of the darkest periods in Soviet history. The Great Terror was not one single purge. It was a chain of campaigns that reached into nearly every part of Soviet society. Former oppositionists, party officials, industrial managers, engineers, military officers, intellectuals, peasants, foreign nationals, ethnic minorities, and ordinary citizens could all be accused of sabotage, espionage, treason, anti-Soviet activity, or membership in imaginary conspiracies. The NKVD was the central instrument of this terror. During the Great Terror of 1937 and 1938, around 1.5 million people were arrested across the Soviet Union. More than 680,000 were executed. Moscow, as the political center of the country, was also one of the most important centers of repression. This made the Moscow NKVD enormously significant. Arrests had to be organized, interrogations had to be conducted, confessions had to be extracted, cases had to be prepared for courts, military tribunals, and extrajudicial bodies such as NKVD troikas. The system produced enormous quantities of paperwork: arrest warrants, interrogation protocols, lists of suspects, execution orders, and reports sent upward through the bureaucracy. Behind every document was a human being who could lose a job, a home, a family, freedom, or life itself. Redens was not standing outside this system. He was one of its senior officials. That point matters. He was not simply a future victim of Stalinism. Long before he became a prisoner, he was part of the security structure that enforced Stalinist repression. In 1937, his career still seemed strong. He was awarded the Order of Lenin, one of the Soviet Union's highest honors. In December that same year, he became a deputy of the First Supreme Soviet of the USSR. At that moment, Redens looked like a man who had survived the danger surrounding him. He had served the regime since its earliest years. He had a powerful position. He had official recognition. He also had a connection to Stalin's family. None of this mattered for long. By 1938, the terror was beginning to turn inward. The NKVD was not only arresting alleged enemies of the Soviet Union. It was preparing to destroy many of its own officers. In January 1938, Redens was removed from Moscow and appointed People's Commissar for Internal Affairs of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. On paper, this was still a prestigious position. He was now the head of the Republican NKVD, responsible for the political police, prisons, surveillance, arrests, and internal security across Soviet Kazakhstan. Yet a transfer in Stalin's Soviet Union could have several meanings. It could be a promotion, it could be a demotion, it could be a warning, or it could be the beginning of a fall. By 1938, the political atmosphere inside the NKVD was changing rapidly. Nikolai Yezhov, the head of the NKVD and one of the principal organizers of the Great Terror, was losing Stalin's confidence. The mass campaigns had resulted in chaos, fabricated investigations, internal rivalries, and an enormous number of arrests. Stalin did not abandon terror. Instead, he began looking for people who could be blamed for its excesses. The logic was cynical. First, the regime ordered mass arrests. Then it accused security officials of carrying out illegal arrests. First, the regime demanded confessions. Then it accused interrogators of falsifying cases. First, the regime relied on the NKVD to eliminate enemies. Then it declared many NKVD officers to be enemies themselves. This was how Stalin's system renewed itself, by regularly destroying the people who had served it. The man who had supervised arrests could become the next prisoner. The interrogator could become the next person questioned through the night. The official who had signed orders could become another name on an execution list. For Redens, his Polish roots may also have made his position more dangerous. In 1937 and 1938, the NKVD conducted the so-called Polish Operation, a mass campaign aimed at people accused of connections to Poland, Polish intelligence, or alleged anti-Soviet networks. In practice, Polish ancestry, family connections, language, religion, or previous contact with Poland could all become suspicious. The operation became one of the largest national operations of the Great Terror. It would be wrong to say that Redens was arrested only because he was Polish. The purge inside the NKVD had its own political logic and targeted many officials of different backgrounds. Even so, Polish origin was certainly not a source of protection in Stalin's USSR. Neither was his connection to Stalin's family. On the 22nd of November, 1938, Stanisław Redens was arrested. His arrest came during the purge of Yezhov's network and the wider destruction of senior NKVD personnel. The men who had carried out Stalin's campaigns of repression were now accused of crimes themselves. The accusations used against them were familiar: espionage, treason, conspiracy, sabotage, participation in anti-Soviet organizations, abuse of power, or collaboration with foreign intelligence. Some had committed terrible crimes during the terror. Others were arrested because they had become politically inconvenient. Many were charged with invented conspiracies designed to explain the failures and chaos of the Great Terror, without placing responsibility on Stalin. Truth was irrelevant. What mattered was a confession, a signature, and a verdict. For Redens, arrest meant entering the same world that so many other Soviet citizens had already experienced: isolation, uncertainty, interrogations, fabricated accusations, and the complete loss of legal protection. The security official had become a prisoner. The man who had worked within the machinery of accusation now faced accusations of his own. His connection to Stalin's family did not save him. Stalin had already demonstrated that personal relationships, old friendships, and family ties did not stand above political suspicion. His own wider family circle was not immune from repression. Anna Alliluyeva, Redens' wife and Nadezhda Alliluyeva's sister, was later arrested and sent to the Gulag after the war. Redens remained under arrest for more than a year. Then on July 21, 1940, he was executed. He was 48 years old. A man of Polish origin had risen from the revolutionary underground into the upper ranks of the Soviet security apparatus. He had served the Cheka, the OGPU, and the NKVD. He had controlled political policing in Moscow during some of the most violent years of Stalin's rule. He had been decorated by the state. He had been connected to Stalin's family. When Stalin's system no longer needed him, none of it had any value. In 1961, during the Khrushchev era, Redens was rehabilitated. This did not erase his own role in the machinery of repression. It meant that the charges used to destroy him had been recognized as part of the lawless, fabricated system of Stalinist terror. The story of Stanisław Redens is not the story of an innocent man suddenly swallowed by an evil regime. He served that regime for most of his adult life. He entered the Cheka during the Civil War. He rose through the Soviet political police. He held authority in Moscow while Stalinist terror expanded across the country. He belonged to the institution that turned suspicion into arrest, interrogation, imprisonment, deportation, and death. Yet his fate reveals something fundamental about Stalinism. No rank was high enough, no service record was long enough, no decoration was prestigious enough, and even the connection to Stalin's own family could not guarantee survival. Redens had spent decades serving a system that demanded total loyalty. In the end, total loyalty was impossible to prove. The NKVD did not only hunt Stalin's enemies, it also consumed its own officers. Stanisław Redens was one of the men who learned, too late, that the machinery of terror had no permanent masters, only temporary servants. If you found this story interesting, leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and write in the comments. Was Stanisław Redens mainly a victim of Stalinism, or an executioner who eventually met the fate he had helped create? Thank you for watching.